David Winter sat at his desk looking at papers that would change his life forever. He worked as a teacher who helped different alien groups get along with humans. But this new job was much bigger than anything he had done before. The papers came from Emperor Thanor himself. The ruler of the Vale people wanted David to teach his 3 daughters. These princesses were causing big problems across the galaxy. They were smart but wild. They broke rules and made their father angry. Maya, David called to his helper. Look at this. The Emperor wants me to teach his daughters how to be good leaders. Maya-chan looked up from her computer. Her face showed worry. Sir, are these the same princesses who stole flying bikes last month? The ones who raced through the holy gardens on Centauri Prime? Yes, those 3. Princess Lily, Princess Kira, and Princess Zara. They also set off fireworks during an important meeting between planets. Their father is very upset. David read more about the princesses. They were all very smart. Lily was 26 years old. Kira was 24. Zara was 22. Each one had studied hard and learned many things. But they used their brains to cause trouble instead of helping their people. They don't need to learn more facts, David said. They need to learn why being a leader matters. When the princesses arrived, David was amazed. Their spaceship was huge and expensive. It was bigger than most buildings in the city. The 3 young women who got off the ship looked proud and angry. They had never met a problem they couldn't solve by being royal. Princess Lily was very tall. Her silver hair moved like it was alive. Her skin had glowing marks that showed she was upset. Her pointed ears had fancy jewelry that probably cost more than David made in a year. Princess Kira looked at everything carefully. Her glowing marks pulsed in steady patterns. David could tell she was already planning how to escape. She was studying the guards and the walls around the school. Princess Zara seemed to think the whole thing was funny. Her glowing marks shifted in patterns that meant she was trying not to laugh. She acted like this was all a big game. I am David Winters, he said politely. Welcome to the Kepler Learning Center. Prison, you mean, Princess Lily said. Her voice was musical like all Vale people. Father thinks sending us to a human school will make us into good little daughters. This isn't a prison, David replied. It's a school. We help people learn how to be better leaders. Princess Kira stepped forward. Mr. Winters, what makes you think you can fix us? Your file says you know about managing colonies and helping different species work together. But nothing about changing behavior. David was impressed. She had studied his background during the trip. My job isn't to fix you. You're not broken. I want to help you use your talents to help your people instead of causing problems. Help our people or help Father's politics? Princess Zara asked with a smile. Hopefully both. But first we need to talk about why those 2 things might be connected. David showed the princesses around the school. They looked at everything carefully. They asked smart questions about human history and politics. They knew more about these things than most professional diplomats. Your teaching method seems to rely on students wanting to learn, Princess Lily said as she looked at the classrooms. What happens when students don't want to participate? Then we figure out what they do want to learn. We find ways to connect that to what they need to know. What if what we want is to leave? Princess Kira asked. Then we talk about why you want to leave. Maybe we can solve those problems while still reaching our goals. Princess Zara's glowing marks got brighter. You're not going to try to break us or force us to obey? Your spirit is exactly what your people need in future leaders. We just need to help you use that spirit to build things up instead of tear them down. The first real lesson happened in the main meeting room. David had planned to teach them basic things about how humans and Veils work together. But he quickly learned the princesses knew more about this topic than he did. The Veil-Human Trade Agreement of 2387, Princess Lily said from memory, gave humans good deals on Veil technology in exchange for human factories and machines. But the way it was used has always helped humans more while stopping Veils from expanding to planets with good resources. What's your point? David asked. My point is that normal diplomatic ways have always put our people at a disadvantage while making it look fair. Maybe the problem isn't how we act, but the systems we're supposed to work in. David stared at her. His planned lesson about basic diplomacy was way too simple for students who could analyze space politics this well. Princess Lily, what would you do differently? Change the basic ideas behind human-Veil relations. Create partnerships based on both sides being strong, not one side being weak. Make economic systems that help both species without forcing either to give up who they are. Princess Kira added, the current system treats Veil biotechnology like exotic luxury items instead of amazing scientific advances that could change human medicine, farming, and environmental care. And human industrial ability, Princess Zara continued, is seen as crude mass production instead of the foundation for building things that could help Veils expand to planets they couldn't live on before. David looked at the three young women who were supposed to need lessons in basic social responsibility. He realized what they actually needed was a chance to use their intelligence on problems worthy of their abilities. Your Highnesses, he said, throwing away his lesson plans. What if instead of teaching you how to work within existing systems, we spend our time designing better systems? The change in their glowing patterns was immediate and dramatic. Boredom and irritation were replaced by interest and excitement that made the room noticeably brighter. You mean actually solve problems instead of just learning to accept them? Princess Lily asked. I mean use your intelligence and your future political power to create the kind of cooperation between species that benefits everyone. And Father approved this approach? Princess Kira asked suspiciously. David smiled. Your father asked me to help you become good leaders for your people. He didn't tell me exactly how to do that. For the first time since they arrived, all three princesses were looking at him with respect instead of resignation. Mr. Winters, Princess Zara said thoughtfully, I think this education might be more interesting than any of us expected. 6 months of unusual education had changed David's school from a correction center into something like a think tank for space policy innovation. The princesses had embraced their studies with the enthusiasm of people finally given problems worthy of their intelligence. The main flaw in current trade agreements, Princess Lily announced during their morning policy meeting, is assuming that human and Veil economies should stay separate but cooperative rather than truly joined together. She pointed to a holographic display she had built overnight, showing economic models that used both species' strengths in ways that created benefits far greater than simple addition. Integration rather than cooperation, David repeated, studying her work with growing admiration. What would that look like in practice? Joint colonies where human industrial infrastructure supports Veil biotechnology development from the beginning, Princess Kira explained, adding her own research to the display. Instead of humans building factories and then adapting them for alien technology, we design integrated systems that use both species' abilities as fundamental components. Princess Zara's contribution focused on the social and cultural implications. Educational exchange programs that begin in childhood, creating generations who speak both languages and understand both cultures by default. Leadership structures that require both human and Veil representation at every level of government and business. David found himself both proud of their intellectual development and slightly intimidated by how sophisticated their proposals were. These ideas could revolutionize relations between species throughout the sector. That's the point, Princess Lily replied with a smile that made her bioluminescent markings brighten noticeably. We've spent months learning about problems. Now we want to implement solutions. Their relationship had evolved far beyond the formal teacher-student dynamic David had originally anticipated. The princesses treated him as an intellectual equal and trusted advisor, sharing perspectives on Veil culture and politics that no human had ever been privileged to receive. David, Princess Kira said during their evening discussion, "May I ask about your background? Your file mentions colonial administration, but not your personal motivations for specializing in relations between species." David settled into his chair, the same spot he'd occupied for hundreds of similar conversations that had gradually become less formal and more intimate. I grew up on a frontier colony where humans and 3 different alien species had to work together for basic survival. I learned early that differences become strengths when people figure out how to combine them effectively. And your family? Wife? Children? Never married. Career and cultural exchange doesn't leave much time for personal relationships. He paused, noting that all 3 princesses were listening with unusual intensity. Why do you ask? Curiosity about someone who has dedicated his life to building bridges between species, Princess Zara replied, though her bioluminescent pattern suggested the answer was more complex than simple curiosity. Over the following weeks, David began noticing changes in the princesses' behavior that had nothing to do with their academic progress. Their formal address had gradually shifted to using his first name. Their conversations included more personal questions about his interests and background. Their bioluminescent markings exhibited patterns that his cultural training suggested indicated emotional attachment beyond professional respect. David, Princess Lily announced one evening after their policy seminar, "We need to discuss something important with you." The formal tone of her voice, combined with the fact that all 3 sisters had positioned themselves facing him with expressions of unusual seriousness, suggested this conversation was going to be significantly more complex than his typical educational discussions. Of course. What's on your minds? Our feelings for you, Princess Kira said directly, her customary analytical approach applied to emotional territory that made David's cultural training completely inadequate. All 3 of us have developed romantic attachment that extends far beyond gratitude or professional admiration. David stared at them, his mind struggling to process information that violated every assumption he'd made about their teacher-student relationship. Your Highnesses, I think there may be some cultural misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, Princess Zara interrupted gently. We understand that human culture typically involves exclusive pair bonding, but Veil society accepts polyamorous family structures as normal and often preferable for political and social stability. We're not suggesting anything inappropriate, Princess Lily added quickly. We're explaining that our feelings for you are genuine, mature, and culturally acceptable within our society's framework for royal marriage. David felt his understanding of the situation reshaping itself around implications he'd never considered. Royal marriage? David, Princess Kira said softly, you've spent 6 months teaching us not just policy and diplomacy, but how to be leaders worthy of our people's trust. You've treated us as individuals rather than political assets, helped us channel our abilities toward constructive purposes, and shown us what kind of partnership could exist between our species. We've fallen in love with someone who sees us as complete people rather than royal obligations, Princess Zara continued. Someone whose intelligence matches our own, whose dedication to cooperation between species aligns with our political goals, and whose character demonstrates the kind of integrity we want in a life partner. All three of you? David asked weakly. All three of us, Princess Lily confirmed. Vale culture has precedents for sister wives who share a husband, particularly in royal families where political alliance and emotional compatibility can both be served through joint marriage. David looked at the three brilliant, beautiful alien princesses who were calmly proposing to restructure his entire life around a relationship model he'd never imagined for himself. I need to think about this, he managed. Of course, Princess Kira replied with understanding. But David, please consider that what we're proposing isn't just personal attachment. A marriage between you and the imperial princesses would create unprecedented opportunities for human-Vale cooperation. Your children would be the first human-Vale hybrids, living bridges between our species with advantages neither of us possesses alone. Our father would approve, Princess Zara added. He sent us here to learn discipline and responsibility. Learning to love someone worthy of respect and partnership demonstrates both qualities admirably. As the princesses departed for the evening, leaving David alone with his thoughts in a decision that would affect not just his personal life, but the future of relations between species, he realized that his simple assignment to provide education for rebellious royalty had evolved into something far more complex and significant than anyone had anticipated. The question now was whether he was brave enough to embrace possibilities that exceeded his wildest expectations, or whether he would retreat into the safety of professional boundaries that no longer seemed adequate to contain what they had created together. David spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with a decision that would either transform his life into something extraordinary or create a diplomatic incident that could destabilize human-Vale relations for decades. The princesses, demonstrating remarkable emotional maturity, gave him space to process their proposal without pressure, though their bioluminescent markings betrayed their anxiety every time they interacted during regular educational sessions. Sir, Myachin inquired during their morning briefing, noting his distracted state. The quarterly reports from the Imperial Court have arrived. Emperor Thanner is requesting updates on the princess's progress. David looked at the official documentation, realizing that his response to the Emperor's inquiry would need to address developments he'd never anticipated when he'd accepted this assignment. Maya, I need you to arrange a priority communication with Emperor Thanner. Personal and confidential. Should I be concerned about what you're going to tell him? David considered the question while reviewing his options. I'm going to tell him that his daughter's education has succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, but that the results include complications no one predicted. The communication with Emperor Thanner took place in David's private office with security protocols that ensured their conversation would remain confidential regardless of its content. The Emperor's image materialized with perfect clarity, his own bioluminescent markings indicating the controlled concern of someone prepared for either good news or diplomatic disaster. Cultural Attaché Winters, the Emperor began formally. Your reports indicate that my daughters have made remarkable progress in their studies. I trust their behavioral problems have been adequately addressed. Your Majesty, your daughter's intelligence and capabilities were never the problem. They were simply directing their considerable abilities toward unproductive rebellion because they weren't being given challenges worthy of their talents. Emperor Thanner's markings shifted to patterns that suggested both satisfaction and curiosity. And now they are being appropriately challenged? They're developing policy proposals that could revolutionize cooperation between species. Their work on economic integration, cultural exchange, and diplomatic innovation exceeds anything my staff or I could have produced. Excellent. When will they be ready to return to court? David took a deep breath, preparing to navigate the most delicate conversation of his diplomatic career. Your Majesty, that depends on your reaction to developments that extend beyond their academic progress. What developments? Your daughters have expressed romantic attachment to their instructor. They've proposed marriage according to Vale customs for polyamorous royal families. The silence that followed lasted long enough for David to wonder if the communication link had failed. Finally, Emperor Thanor's bioluminescent markings brightened with what David hoped was amusement rather than preparation for execution orders. "And your response to this proposal, Mr. Winters?" "I'm honored by their feelings and impressed by their emotional maturity, but concerned about the diplomatic implications of a human marrying into the imperial family." "The diplomatic implications," the Emperor said thoughtfully, "might be precisely what both our species need. Tell me, do you return their affections?" David realized he was being evaluated by possibly the most powerful leader in known space, and that his answer would determine not just his personal future but the trajectory of relations between species. "Yes, Your Majesty. I do." "Then accept their proposal. My daughters are intelligent, capable, and worthy of respect. If they have chosen someone who appreciates those qualities and can provide the intellectual partnership they require, I consider that evidence of excellent judgment on their part." "You're not concerned about the political complications?" Emperor Thanor's laugh was musical, carrying harmonics that suggested genuine pleasure. "Mr. Winters, I sent my daughters to you for education because their rebellion was becoming politically problematic. If they've learned to channel their intelligence toward constructive purposes and found a worthy partner in the process, that exceeds my most optimistic expectations." The marriage ceremony took place 6 weeks later in the imperial court on Vale Prime, with diplomatic representatives from dozens of species attending what the galactic media had already declared the most significant wedding between species in recorded history. David found himself wearing formal attire that combined human ceremonial traditions with Vale royal customs, creating an outfit that somehow made him feel both ridiculous and remarkably dignified. "Nervous?" Princess Lily asked during the pre-ceremony preparations, her bioluminescent markings bright with excitement and affection. "Terrified," David admitted. "I'm about to marry 3 alien princesses, become a member of the imperial family, and accidentally establish precedents for future human-Vale relations. The potential for spectacular failure seems considerable." "David," Princess Kira said with the logical precision that had made him fall in love with her mind, "you've already succeeded at the most difficult part. You helped us become the kind of leaders our people need, and we helped you discover that your talents extend far beyond cultural exchange into genuine partnership. The ceremony is just making official what we've already created together," Princess Zara added. The wedding itself was magnificent, blending human vows with Vale commitment rituals that created bonds both legal and spiritual. David's transformation from cultural attaché to imperial prince consort was witnessed by representatives from across the known galaxy, establishing his marriage as a symbol of successful cooperation between species. The honeymoon, conducted at a private estate that combined the best of both human and Vale luxury, provided David and his 3 wives with their first opportunity to explore their relationship without the pressure of diplomatic scrutiny or educational objectives. "This is still surreal," David confessed during their first evening together as married partners. 6 months ago, I thought I was running a finishing school for rebellious royalty. And now?" Princess Lily asked, settling beside him with the easy intimacy that had developed during their courtship. "Now I'm married to 3 of the most intelligent, capable, beautiful women I've ever met, and apparently responsible for helping reshape relations between species throughout the sector. Are you happy?" Princess Kira inquired with the directness that had initially intimidated him and now provided one of his favorite aspects of her personality. David looked at his 3 wives, whose bioluminescent markings were glowing with contentment and affection that made the entire room seem brighter, and realized that happiness was inadequate to describe his emotional state. "I'm grateful," he said honestly, "for the assignment that brought us together, for your father's wisdom in approving our marriage, and for the extraordinary life we're going to build together." 3 months later, the situation became even more complex when all three princesses announced they were pregnant, a development that transformed their marriage from significant diplomatic alliance into the foundation for the first generation of human Vale hybrid children. David, Princess Zara announced with glowing excitement, "We're going to be parents." "All of us," Princess Lily added, her hand resting on what was already a noticeable change in her silhouette. The doctors confirmed that human Vale genetics are compatible in ways that create hybrid children with advantages from both species, Princess Kira explained with scientific precision. David stared at his wives, realizing that their simple education assignment had evolved into something that would literally create new forms of intelligent life. Enhanced empathic abilities from Vale heritage combined with human adaptability and problem-solving capabilities, Princess Kira explained. "Our children will be natural diplomats and cultural bridges." "Your education assignment," Princess Zara said with amusement, "is about to become a multi-generational project in practical cooperation between species." David laughed, pulling his three pregnant wives into an embrace that encompassed not just their personal happiness, but the extraordinary future they were creating together. "I suppose we'd better start planning nurseries that accommodate both human and Vale child-rearing traditions." "Already done," all three princesses replied simultaneously, their bioluminescent markings synchronized with the perfect harmony that had made their polyamorous marriage work so beautifully. Outside their private quarters, the galaxy continued its complex dance of politics and cultural exchange between species. But inside their family sanctuary, David Winters and his three wives prepared for the arrival of children who would represent entirely new possibilities for cooperation between species that had learned to create strength from their differences. 18 months after the assignment that had transformed David Winters from cultural attaché to imperial prince consort, he stood in the throne room of the Vale Imperial Palace carrying his infant son while his three wives presented their children to Emperor Thanor for the first time. The scene would have been unimaginable when he'd first accepted the education contract, but now it felt like the natural culmination of extraordinary events that had exceeded everyone's expectations. "Grandfather," Princess Lily announced formally, presenting her daughter with the pride of someone who'd successfully created something unprecedented. "Meet Princess Arya Wintersvale, first of the hybrid generation." The infant in her arms possessed her mother's pointed ears and silver hair, but her father's human facial structure and what appeared to be bioluminescent markings that pulsed with distinctly different patterns from pure Vale children. Princess Kira stepped forward with her son, whose human adaptability was already evident in the way he tracked movement and responded to voices in both human and Vale languages. Prince Kale Wintersvale, whose empathic abilities are already demonstrating enhanced range compared to traditional Vale children. David's own son, born to Princess Zara, represented perhaps the most striking example of hybrid advantages. Little Marcus possessed his father's analytical intelligence combined with his mother's intuitive understanding of emotional nuance, creating a child who seemed to comprehend complex social dynamics despite being barely old enough to focus his eyes properly. Emperor Thanor approached his grandchildren with expressions of wonder that transcended his usual royal composure. When he held baby Arya, her bioluminescent markings synchronized with his in patterns that suggested immediate recognition of genetic and emotional connection. "Remarkable," the Emperor murmured, studying the infant who represented the future of relations between species. "She responds to Vale emotional resonance while maintaining human adaptability patterns. These children will be natural diplomats. They're already demonstrating abilities that neither species possesses alone," Princess Kira reported with scientific precision. "Enhanced empathic range, improved pattern recognition, accelerated language acquisition, and what appears to be instinctive understanding of cross-cultural communication." David watched his father-in-law bond with his grandchildren and marveled at how completely his life had changed. "Your Majesty, when you assigned your daughters to my care, did you anticipate any of this?" Emperor Thanor's bioluminescent markings brightened with what David had learned to recognize as satisfaction mixed with amusement. David, my son, I anticipated that exposing my daughters to someone who treated them as individuals rather than political assets would produce positive changes. I did not anticipate that those changes would extend to creating the first hybrid generation, but I am profoundly pleased with the results. The education succeeded beyond expectations? The education transformed 3 rebellious princesses into confident leaders, provided them with a worthy partner who appreciates their intelligence, and created children who will serve as bridges between our species for generations. I would call that success on a scale I had not dared to hope for. The formal presentation of the hybrid children to the imperial court created a sensation that rippled throughout the galaxy. Media coverage focused not just on the unprecedented nature of human veil hybrids, but on what they represented for the future of cooperation between species. Prince Consort Winters, announced Ambassador Elena Rodriguez from the Terran Federation, your family has become a symbol of successful integration that other species are already requesting to study and emulate. David, still adjusting to his formal title and the political implications of his personal choices, looked around the reception hall where representatives from dozens of worlds celebrated the birth of children who might reshape galactic civilization. Ambassador, I just fell in love with 3 extraordinary women and married them according to their cultural traditions. The political implications were secondary. Perhaps, but the practical results are revolutionary. Your children represent proof that cooperation between species can create evolutionary advantages rather than compromise. That concept is transforming how species approach integration throughout the sector. 3 years later, David stood in his new office as Cultural Integration Minister, a position created specifically to utilize his unique experience with marriage between species and hybrid child rearing. His 3 wives had taken on formal roles within the imperial court, using their education experience to develop policies that served as models for cooperation between species. The Centauri Integration Project has requested our family's consultation, Princess Lily announced during their daily briefing, her daughter Arya content in a specially designed carrier that allowed her to observe the proceedings while her bioluminescent markings responded to her mother's emotional states. 3 different species want to establish cooperative colonies using our marriage and child-rearing model as a template. And the Terran Federation, Princess Kira added while managing her son Kale's feeding schedule with the efficiency that had made her such an effective policy analyst, has formally requested that we develop training programs for human diplomats who will be working in polyamorous family structures between species. David looked at his wives, who had transformed from rebellious princesses into respected leaders whose influence extended far beyond the Veil Empire, and marveled at the scope of change they had created together. When I accepted the assignment to provide education for 3 difficult princesses, he said, I thought the biggest challenge would be convincing you to follow diplomatic protocols. Instead, Princess Zara observed with amusement while little Marcus demonstrated his precocious ability to respond to both human and veil vocal patterns. We convinced you to abandon traditional protocols entirely and help create new ones. Their children had indeed become the living bridges between species that Emperor Thanor had envisioned. At barely 3 years old, Arya could communicate basic concepts in 4 different languages and demonstrated empathic abilities that allowed her to sense emotional distress in adults of any species. Kale's analytical capabilities combined with intuitive understanding made him remarkably effective at resolving conflicts between children from different cultural backgrounds. Marcus showed early signs of becoming a natural teacher, able to help others understand complex concepts by presenting them from multiple cultural perspectives simultaneously. The hybrid advantage appears to be even more significant than our initial projections suggested, Princess Kira reported, reviewing the latest developmental assessments. Our children aren't just combining human and veil traits. They're developing entirely new capabilities that emerge from the interaction between different neural structures. Enhanced pattern recognition, accelerated social learning, instinctive cultural translation abilities, Princess Lily enumerated. They're going to be natural ambassadors and mediators. David watched his son Marcus attempt to mediate a dispute between two alien children whose species had been in conflict for generations, using a combination of logical argument and empathic connection that somehow convinced both parties that cooperation was more interesting than competition. They're also going to be the first generation to grow up truly multicultural, he observed. They'll never experience species differences as barriers because they'll be living proof that differences create strengths. Emperor Thanor's final assessment of the education program came during the children's third birthday celebration, a family gathering that included not just the imperial court, but representatives from every species that had requested consultation on integration policies between species. David, the emperor said, watching his grandchildren interact with alien dignitaries with the easy confidence of people who'd never learned to see species differences as obstacles, my daughters learned discipline through love rather than punishment, responsibility through partnership rather than force, and leadership through cooperation rather than dominance. That was precisely the education they needed. And what they taught me, David replied, was that the best cultural exchange happens when people see each other as individuals first and species representatives second. The children you've created together will never need to learn that lesson, Princess Zara observed, watching Arya help a young Centauri child understand a game that required both human logic and veil empathy. For them, cooperation across species will be as natural as breathing. The celebration continued late into the evening, with David reflecting on how completely his understanding of family, education, and relations between species had been transformed by three alien princesses who taught him that rebellion could be redirected into revolution when guided by love instead of punishment. Are you happy with how the education turned out? Princess Lily asked as they prepared their children for bed in the nursery that had become a model for child rearing between species throughout the galaxy. David looked around the room where human lullabies mixed with veil harmony songs, where toys combined the best of multiple cultures' approaches to childhood development, and where three hybrid children were growing up as living proof that differences could create unprecedented strengths. I'm happy, he said, with what we learned together, that education works best when it's mutual, that discipline emerges from understanding rather than force, and that the most important lessons are often taught by the students to their teachers. And our reward? Princess Kira asked with the directness that had made him fall in love with her mind years ago. David pulled his three wives and three children into an embrace that encompassed not just their personal happiness, but the extraordinary legacy they were creating for future generations. Our reward, he said, is knowing that what we built together will help countless other families and species learn to see differences as opportunities rather than obstacles. Your father sent you away to learn discipline, but what you really learned was how to turn love into a force for positive change. Outside their family quarters, the galaxy continued its complex evolution toward greater cooperation between species, guided by policies and precedents that had emerged from a simple education assignment that had exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. Inside their home, three former rebel princesses and their human husband raised children who would never know a universe where species boundaries were more important than shared values and mutual respect. The education had succeeded completely, not by breaking rebellious spirits, but by channeling extraordinary energy toward creating the kind of future that benefited everyone involved.